Hey there, sports fans. Welcome back to True North Sports Talk podcast. As you can see, Peter Barclay here, your host, and we have got a packed episode for you this week. And we are covering two different things that are going on in the world of sports right now. Today, we are going to be talking about, yes, you guessed it, the first week of baseball. It is back. Spring training's in full swing. And there is already a ton to talk about, including the fact that teams that thought they were done maybe got some news where they are not quite as done as they thought they were and may have some more heavy lifting to do. So, as mentioned, we are now into week one of spring training, and we did a short on this throughout the week that the Blue Jays have already been hit hard with some devastating injury news. 3 players, at least 2 of which, if not all 3, they were really hoping for at least 2 bounce back seasons and 1 good full season from the 3 players that are already dealing with massive injury issues. And so this is going to make a pretty big impact on the Blue Jays season. So we're going to cover all of that. We're going to talk about that. They also made a trade that was very surprising, as again, we kind of figured they were set. They had everything they needed. And then they traded one of their guys from last year in Joey Loperfido. So we're going to cover that. We're going to cover José Berríos as he discussed what has so far this offseason been a forgotten issue, because he's kind of been, in a way, the forgotten man in all of the stuff that's been going on. And what's being forgotten was the story of him being left off the roster, even though he was injured during the playoffs, and leaving the team. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about non-roster invitees, some guys who are looking to catch on with the team, and some interesting pieces near the back end of the show. So you're going to want to stick around. If this is your thing, we are going to talk about what's not everything, but some major events happening in Milan Cortina, and that is the 2026 Olympic Games. Now, here at True North Sports Talk, we are a Canadian podcast, and so obviously being from Canada, hockey's a big deal. So we're going to talk about how the 2 hockey tournaments are going, men's and women's, and the only real setback that isn't 100% surprising, but the fashion of it was surprising, is that Team Canada on the women's side had a bit of a spectacular dud against the Americans. But we're going to talk about all of that. And then we've had a couple of days now where there's been controversy in a sport that kind of makes you go, what? Controversy happens in that sport? Like, it seems like such a benign sport. And somehow it has both the men's and women's teams being accused of cheating. That's going to be pretty explosive. So you want to stick around till we get to that segment. This is going to be one loaded episode. We're going to try and keep it under an hour, so that's 56 more minutes. But we'll see, we may go over a little bit. So, buckle up, let's dive in. I got my beverage, hopefully you got yours. And let's talk sports. I don't know about y'all, but up here where I live in Canada, we've been getting what we could call balmy weather lately, as in it's like hovering between +3 and -3. So for winter here, that's pretty warm. And that added to the fact that the Blue Jays are in spring training, at least to a sports fan, lends some excitement that spring, even though it's like a month and a half away, could be in the air. And it is, but opening day of spring training on Tuesday, February 10th, was a gut punch. I remember coming home from work, or even later in the day at work, checking the app just to see, hey, pitchers and catchers have reported this and that. And it goes, yeah, and 3 guys are pretty much done. 1 for the rest of spring training, the other 2 for the rest of the year. And one of those that's done for the rest of the year is a bit of a controversy in itself, just based on the fact that, so 162 times 2 is like 400 games. Dude's only gonna have played 52. That's not a good number. And we're paying him a lot of money to rehab. So that's caused fans to be in a bit of a tiff. It's got other pundits. One who's just jumping back into the world of sports. My man says Sixero, shout out to him. But it's just, this guy is probably untradeable, but we need to unload that contract ASAP. And I've been saying that since he got hurt at the beginning of last year. So, pitchers and catchers reported to Dunedin, and John Schneider delivered probably the worst news we could have imagined. You have Anthony Santander, and this is the dud we're talking about. This has got to be one of the worst contracts ever signed in Blue Jays history. That's saying a lot. Just 2 years into the contract. Santander is out 5 to 6 months. He has a left labral shoulder injury. And again, 5-6 months he's out, means he won't return, if at all, until August. And then he's going to have to spend quite a bit of time in the minors getting himself up to speed, so we may not see him in the big leagues until September. And hopefully they're in a position where that matters. But at 31 years old, he's in the second year, as we mentioned, of a 5-year, $92.5 million contract that he signed last offseason. This has been a complete disaster for the Blue Jays. Again, he only appeared in 52 games last year, missing most of the year with the same type of shoulder issues after crashing into the wall. Quite frankly, this guy should never have been in the field at all last year. He only had 6 home runs in 194 at-bats. That's just not good enough for 2 years worth of $92.5 million. That just doesn't cut it. He came back in time for the playoffs. He got into a few games and then his back gave out. He never should have been in those playoff games because he was a detriment more than a help. And then his shoulder needs surgery again. Snyder said, "We did everything we could to avoid this." I think at this point, after last year, that was the best possible way to get him back to 100%. So that's John Schneider quoted on this injury. But here's the reality. Santander injured himself while ramping up hitting in January. That's not a good sign. The Blue Jays are paying him over $18 per through 2029. And again, to have only played in 52 games over 2 seasons, that's just not acceptable. And having seen this myself, and as Sid pointed out on his podcast, which returned this week also, just in time for spring training, and it is great to have him back. And I've been thinking this since he left breakfast television, that we need his voice back in sports. That a guy like George Springer was very injured, hitting home runs, helping the team. A guy like Bo Bichette came back and played on one leg, hitting home runs, helping the team. They don't even offer a contract to Bo Bichette, which is astounding to this pundit. But those guys were out there working it, no matter what the cost. And this guy has only played 50 games in 2 years. We just can't have that around this team. To me, this is actually a blessing in disguise. It opens up Nathan Lucas. It opens up Jose Sanchez, I think it is, that we just got. We'll get to that later. It opens up playing time for Davis Schneider, for Addison Barger. It makes things a heck of a lot easier when penciling in the lineup for John Schneider. Because now you have guys you know are going to be there day in and day out, as opposed to a guy every time you send him up there, you're holding your breath. And that's just not how you run a Major League Baseball team. Now, Bowden Francis is the second extremely devastating bit of news. Simply because he had a rough go of it last year after a strong showing in the second half of 2024. Now, I've said this to friends or people in my circles outside of the podcast. I've tried to remember the name on the podcast before, but Bowden Francis is starting to remind me of Dustin McGowan, starting to remind me of Aaron Sanchez, where they have all the potential in the world. Even Ricky Tiedemann is in this category, but they just can't seem to stay on the field. So in attempting to come back from his injury last year and getting ready for this season, Bowden Francis learned that he will undergo ulnar collateral ligament reconstruction. And y'all know this, as I do, as Tommy John. So as soon as you hear that ulnar collateral, it's like, uh-oh, that ain't good. So he obviously 12 to 18 months. So it could be June next year before we see Francis back on a major league mound. Who knows if that's even going to be a Toronto mound. It would be nice, but it's just another setback for a 29-year-old who was hoping to compete for a spot in the rotation, or at least be the next man up. He went 2-8 with a 6.05 ERA in 14 starts last year before the injury shut him down. He had shoulder and elbow issues, so we kind of weren't surprised as to what the injury was. It was just not the news you wanted on day one of spring training. For Francis, for the Blue Jays fans and organization, this is particularly tough because Francis was dominant. He had something like 3 to 4 one hitters in a row in 2024. When he went out there, it was just like, okay, we're getting a win today. And then with the injuries last year, he just wasn't himself to that 2-8 record. And then when they finally took him out of the rotation, which I think they waited too long, and then Eric Lauer basically saved the season by stepping in until they got Scherzer and until they got Bieber, But in 2024, Francis posted a 3.30 ERA because the numbers from the first half kind of ballooned that a little bit. But the Blue Jays were counting on him as a bounce back thing. And in my circles again, and even on the podcast a little bit, his name has come up a lot as them not needing to necessarily do a lot because they have guys waiting in the wings. Jimmy Garcia is another one. Thankfully, we've heard nothing about him so far, which hopefully means he's on track the way he's supposed to be. But those were two guys where like, yo, this is going to make us even better without them even spending any money, making any trades, any of that kind of stuff. So Schneider confirmed the surgery is happening. He said Francis will be rehabbing throughout the year, and we are hoping that he'll be back in time for spring training next year. Now, our shiny new toy we got at the deadline last year, who was recovering from Tommy John, and then pitched in the playoffs and carried a bit of a load for us once he did come back, he has forearm fatigue. Now, this is something they should really be cautious with from a guy coming off Tommy John. But we're expecting him to start on the injured list at the beginning of the season. Now again, coming off Tommy John, his arm is still building back up to what it would have been 2 years ago before the Tommy John. And so this is a guy we acquired last year at the trade deadline. It was the big move that really made him and Louis Varland are the two big moves that really helped us reach to the World Series. He threw 40.1 innings down the stretch, another 18.2 in the postseason, and he was huge for them. Granted, he gave up the home run where they ended up losing the World Series, but he's not a reliever. They were just hoping that he could stop the bleeding. So now coming off Tommy John surgery, all those high stress innings, you could imagine his arm is a wee bit tired. The Blue Jays are being really, really cautious, which is wise, according to Schneider. So there's no timeline for his return. If they can stay in a good spot until he's 100% ready to go, that's all they really need to do. They do have guys who can step in, thinking Eric Lauer, Cody Ponce. You have guys there. But this is also why, on previous podcasts, I talked about getting a Bassett back. I talked about getting a Scherzer back. Scherzer's still out there. You could have these guys to fill in until he returns, and even then, to give you that much more depth once he does. So, Schneider's quote here, we'll work through it with Shane week to week. No procedures or anything in the off season. It's just a high-level pitcher who's coming off Tommy John. Pitched longer than we might have expected. Obviously going to Game 7 of the World Series, the 11th inning. And he was in some really high-stress outings. Bieber exercised his $16 million player option, which was a gift to the Blue Jays, to be sure. And so he is under contract, but missing him is going to make the beginning of the season a little more tough. So what does that mean for the Blue Jays? Well, your starting rotation could look something like Dylan Cease, Kevin Gausman, you got José Berríos, and then I guess you're expecting Trey Savage to start with the big team. Again, I've said this before, it would have been better, again, to have Scherzer and Bassett around and let Trey start at AAA. It's not a slight to Trey Savage. It's just he's such a young guy, and again, we don't want to Alek Manoah him. That's another guy that would have been good to keep around just for this type of circumstance. Then you got to figure you got Cody Ponce that will be fighting for a spot in the rotation, as well as Eric Lauer if we can catch lightning in a bottle 2 years in a row with him. Hopefully he doesn't Bowden Francis us. So you have what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys even still? That could make up a pretty strong rotation. It's still solid, but they've lost 2 really strong candidates. Well, one's a Cy Young winner, the other we were hoping for a bounce back. So their rotation depth, a little bit ahead of myself there, it's taken a massive hit already. Thankfully, one thing this inept front office did during the offseason was go out and get some guys so that we actually had rotation depth to fall back on. In the outfield, losing Santander really is a non-issue. You got George Springer, Dalton Varsho, you got Miles Straw, you got Davis Snyder, you got Nathan Lucas, you got Barger, you got Jesus Sanchez that they acquired in the trade. And supposedly even Okamoto can play the outfield. So losing Santander, I don't think that's really much of a loss, really. It just opens up room for guys who can get the job done. So, leading into that, talking about the outfield, let's talk about this trade. Joey Loperfido. This one literally came out of nowhere. When we said we were trading or had made a trade, I was like, huh? For what? I'm like, the only thing we really needed was a pitcher. But then when I started reading on it, the Blue Jays traded Loperfido, who came from Houston. He's going back to Houston in exchange for Jesus Sanchez. Yes, you heard that right, back to Houston. Loperfido was originally acquired in the Yusei Kikuchi deal at the trade deadline. So less than 2 years later, he's going back home. Loperfido was solid while he was here, 26 years old. He hit .333 with 4 homers in 41 games with the Blue Jays last season, but that was in very limited at-bats. He was very well liked by the fans, by his teammates. But with so many outfielders on this team, he really didn't have a clear path to playing time. Sanchez, on the other hand, is 28 years old. He hit .237 with 14 homers and 48 RBIs, split between Miami and Houston. Kind of redundant a little bit as Loperfido, just because he is a left-handed bat. He's owed $6.8 million this year and has 1 more year of arbitration left. He's also, unlike Loperfido, he doesn't have any minor league options left. So, in a way, he's kind of stuck on the big league roster. So why does this trade make sense? Well, as Ross Atkins said, the power is real. He hits the ball hard, or as hard as anybody, and that's a good fit for us. .237, Ross. Does he really hit the ball hard? Question is, can he even hit the ball? Who cares how hard it is? The timing is obvious. This trade happened just days after Santander's injury, so they were looking to replace his power. Sanchez gives the Blue Jays a similar profile, only he's not a switch hitter. For the Astros, Dana Brown, their general manager, said Houston reacquired Loperfido because he has 5 years of team control. And their belief is that his bat is going in the right direction. Loperfido was classy in his exit. He said, "I feel like I can leave knowing I'm a better player now than I was when I got here. I'm grateful to have gotten to play with this group, to play in Toronto, for the fans, for the whole country. That postseason run is something I'll have for my whole life, and I'll always be grateful for that. That's for sure, because you never know if you'll ever get that far again. That's the thing about sports. Year to year, you never know." And that's a beautiful thing. Loperfido, we knew it all along. He's a good dude, but he will get more playing time in Houston than he could here in Toronto. For the Blue Jays, pretty clear this is a Santander replacement move. Sanchez slots into the outfield mix, provides some power that they could definitely use. But here's the thing I've always said. I don't put a lot of stock in home runs. So Santander had 194 hits last year and only had 6 home runs. So what did he do at the plate the other 188 at bats? You get where I'm going with this? 800 at bats in a season. If you only get 40 home runs, what'd you do the rest of the time? Are you on base? Because if you look at the average alone, much less the OPS or the OBS, sorry, OBP is what I'm looking for. But if you look at some of those numbers, you say he can hit? Really? 14 home runs? How many plate appearances did he have last year? Because that's a pretty small percentage if you ask me. So saying that he provides power, well, maybe he can hit some home runs, but what does he do when he's not? That's always my question when it comes to power hitters. That's why I like a Vladdy, a George Springer, a Bo Bichette, because in between home runs, they're on base, stealing bases, making pitchers work, making pitchers think. And so that's why those guys are perennially hitting 300. So 237, that's just not going to cut it in my world. Because your OBP, like if you're not on base, what good are you to the team? If you're getting out all the time and launching the occasional home run, to me, that's not a good hitter at all. Can he bunt? I'd rather get a bunt down and get out that way than swing and miss or ground out or whatever it is he's doing the rest of the time. So if he can't do those fundamental things in baseball, why did we trade Joey Loperfido for him? Doesn't make no sense to me. Time will tell if the Blue Jays got fleeced here or not. But the fact that Jose Sanchez started in Miami tells me all I need to know. All right. Now, the forgotten elephant in the room for the Blue Jays, and that was José Berríos, and the fact that he apologized for his absence. That's a good start. And one thing, even though this was an issue during the World Series, it wasn't. Like, it was a talking point a little bit, but it didn't really seem to affect the team all that much. And I think the reason for that is, one thing we always knew about José Berríos before this incident, he's a real class act. He's a stand-up dude. He always took responsibility, even when he wasn't pitching well. And he was just a very likable guy. So this doesn't have to be a storyline going into spring training off the field. The question was, are we going to get a healthy Berríos who's pitching like he did up until late August into September last year? Which Berríos are we going to get? That's my only question. The fact that he issued a public apology and mentioned both his teammates, the Blue Jays fans, and anyone else involved, the organization I would assume as well, for leaving the team during the World Series, that's a very manly, classy move on his part. Now, as we'll talk about a little bit later on, those apologies had already happened face-to-face, man-to-man, behind closed doors. So this was just reaffirming publicly what had already happened. The Jays as a team are already moved past this in spring training simply because they understand the apology happened and let's go forward. So what really happened? Well, late in 2025, Berríos was moved to the bullpen. He had a tough year last year. He's never been on the injured list. But for the most part of the second half of last year, anyone who watched this team with any kind of regularity knew something was wrong. We could tell that this wasn't the José Berríos we had come to know and love. And that was confirmed when, for the first time in his entire decade-long career, he was placed on the 15-day injured list. He had right elbow and bicep inflammation, and this was a completely new experience for him. Going into the playoffs, you have to understand that you have to go with your guys who are pitching the best. And that just simply was not José Berríos. And for a guy who's never experienced that in his entire life, that was difficult to handle. The Blue Jays made it to the World Series, and Berríos was not on the roster. And instead of staying with the team to support his teammates, he went home to Puerto Rico to rehab with his family. Now, to me, that I get where people are like, really? But at the same time, be where the support is. He was with his family. I can't begrudge him for doing that. He's injured. And if he gets the support he needs from his family, and this is about a human being here, not a robot. So if he needs the support of his wife and kids mentally to deal with something he's never had to deal with at this level, why begrudge him for that? I mean, the optics, yes, are terrible. But really, we're talking about a human being here. He wasn't going to play. And if that's what was best for him, and only he knows what that is, this becomes a non-talking point. Now, most injured players stay with their team during the playoffs. It's a show of solidarity. Bo Bichette, for example, didn't play in the first 2 rounds due to injury. He was in the dugout every game. Berríos kinda just left without much notice. But at the same time, why be a distraction? And then we made it one anyway. So this just, it's a crazy situation. To me, it should be a non-issue. Especially if there was behind the scenes conversations that we don't know about and we don't need to know about. Why is this an issue? The team was fine. It wasn't a distraction unless we made it one. So, come Thursday now, Berríos addressed this and said, I made one bad decision to go back home to keep working on my rehab and stay close to my family. Jose, you'll probably never see this, but that wasn't a bad decision, my friend. Spending time with your family, if you can, and he could, is never a bad decision. He continued, at that moment, I wasn't pitching and I wasn't feeling great, so there is mental health involved. I wanted to be close to my family. Why is that a bad thing? I didn't bring them to Canada because they were going to miss days in school. Any parents out there, that should be completely understandable. So I thought of that. I apologize. Maybe I made a bad decision to go back to my home. That's classy. He really didn't make a bad decision. In fact, I would argue he made the right decision. Because at the end of the day, baseball is going to stop at some point in his life. He will retire. But who's going to be there when he does? His wife, his kids, his mom, his dad, if they're still alive, his cousins, his aunts, his uncles, his family. They are for life. Baseball is but for a time. And so I really don't feel he made a bad decision here. Again, the timing of it, the optics of it, or just the communication of it, yes, there was something lacking there. But the actual thing he did wasn't wrong. He did what was best for his family, and that is his job as a husband and father. Period. There's nothing else to say after that. He continued, as he was talking to the reporters, I told the Latin guys and some of the closest players to me, and in spring training, I've already apologized to them. I told them I understand if they don't agree or aren't happy with me, but that's what I did, and I apologized for that. What more could you ask for? It was only necessary because of public pressure. John Snyder took some time, or took some responsibility, saying, I think that probably could have been handled a little bit differently on everyone's end. Really, looking back, I wish I had done things a little bit differently. I think the biggest thing in this whole situation was the fact that it was a communication breakdown. People noticed, wanted to know why, but it wasn't their business to know why. The same thing happened with Linus Ullmark this year and the Ottawa Senators. It was communicated, he took a leave of absence, and everyone should have left it alone after that, but they didn't. So here's the thing, José Berríos essentially did the same thing for not the same reasons, but similar ones. And it should have been left at that. But being the class act and classy guy that he has taken the steps to reconcile to his teammates. And it's just amazing to see a guy with that much class in real time do what needs to be done, even if it really isn't something that needs to be done. So why does this matter? Well, Berríos could have been seen as being on the bubble for a rotation spot heading into camp. Well, depending on his health, I don't really see that, but being a fourth or fifth starter is what you would expect him to be this year. So the Blue Jays, as we know, signed Dylan Cease and Cody Ponce. I don't think Cody Ponce really pushed Berríos down the depth chart, but with what you expected would have been Dylan Cease, Kevin Gausman, Shane Bieber, Berríos, and then either Trey Savage, Eric Lauer, Cody Ponce, whoever the fifth guy was. That's what you expected your opening day pitching rotation to look like. Well, I think that just leaves Berríos in the fourth spot and maybe even the third spot. I don't think he was ever out of the mix for a rotation spot, but I think it all really depends on his health level and what his pitches look like against live batters. So, Schneider said, and this is a quote, "It's handled." I think Jose realizes that it probably could have been handled differently. I think everyone does. But it needs to be put to rest for the rest of the season. The only way this gets brought back up, or should be brought back up at any point, is if something similar happens again. Berríos finished last year with a 9-5 record, a 4.17 ERA, and he is still owed $70 million over the next 3 years. So the Blue Jays, they're not stuck with him. And he is an innings eater who just wants to get back to being the workhorse that he's been throughout his career. To his credit, as you would almost expect, Berríos takes accountability. Another quote from him, "I'm a competitor. I have 3 kids. I want to show them that when we fall down, we have to stand up and keep going." As a parent, that is one of the best things that we can model to our kids. I respect that. You could say he messed up. I don't even think he really did. And even though it wasn't necessary, he apologized, and now he's moving forward. So for the rest of us, time to turn the page. If he's healthy and pitching well, that's all that matters for the rest of the year. All right, so now to the guys who are actually kind of on the bubble, trying to get a job for this year. We're going to start with Eric Lauer. Now this is a bit of a sticky situation, simply because he was fantastic for the Blue Jays when it mattered most. And you could say, but hey, he didn't pitch at all hardly in the playoffs. How could you say when it mattered most? Well, think about it. If he wasn't dominating in June, July, August even, do the Blue Jays make it to the World Series? When they needed someone to step into that rotation, when they were hemorrhaging guys and hemorrhaging wins, he stopped the bleeding. He was there when it mattered the most. And then the Blue Jays had the audacity to fight him in arbitration. I would say the same thing about Eric Lauer that I said about Tarek Skubal. Whatever he asked for, and he was not unreasonable at like $5.75 million. You have the money, just give it to him. But to have him lose in arbitration the way he did, and a guy who has done it, but has potential to save your season, why are you messing with that? Don't make no sense. So Lauer was a hero from last season. Plain and simple. Now, with Shane Bieber being injured, he'll have a chance to show it again if he can make the rotation out of spring training. Alongside Berríos, Schneider said, we have planned, you have Cease, you got Gauze, obviously Kevin Gausman, you got Ponce, you got Trey. That leaves one spot open. And if Lauer is the leading candidate, you would expect him to be making that roster. Now, Sid and some other guys, and myself included, have looked at the fact that the wild card this year in almost everything could be a young man named Ricky Tiedemann. Now we've been hearing about him for a good 3 years. He's recovering from his own Tommy John. But the fact of the matter is, this is a guy who rose through the ranks, surprisingly, faster than Trey Savage did last year. And he's also a lefty, which, unless Lauer's in the rotation, we don't really have. And Mason Fluharty and Eric Lauer are about the only lefties we have in the bullpen. And so depending on how Tiedemann comes out from his Tommy John through training camp, and if he can stay healthy, again, he's kind of that Dustin McGowan thing where there's all this potential there, but can he stay healthy? So we'll see. He won't be stretched out as a starter right away. So this is the thing. He could provide some space for guys to move in and out of the rotation. He can provide some openers, as it were. So maybe he'll pitch 3 innings, 2 innings. And you bring in a Lauer or a Ponce behind him for 4 or 5 innings. And then you get to the back end of your bullpen. It just gives you that much more of an opportunity. Then we have CJ Stubbs, who's brought in as a non-roster invitee. And depending on how he does, he might supplant Tyler Heineman as the backup behind Alejandro Kirk. But it will give Heineman some competition for that backup role. Gage Stanifer was brought in for pitching depth, but the 40-man's pretty jam-packed at this moment. But who knows? We've already had 3 catastrophic injuries to start the season, or to start training camp, not even the season. So who knows what opportunities abound. Alright, looks like we might run over the hour a little bit. We're getting there. But now we are getting to the Olympics. Shifting gears a little bit, and we are going to talk some hockey puck and some controversy. So hopefully you stuck around this far. Hopefully you enjoy our Olympic talk. And as yet, we are on day 9 of the games. And the men's hockey tournament is starting to heat up. The preliminary round is almost over as the quarterfinals are starting. Let's see. On Tuesday, the 17th. And so yeah, this is the men's team. They are as yet 3-0. They have clinched Group A. I'm trying to think of a test they faced, but they haven't really faced one yet. They had a 5-0 opener against Czechia. They beat France 10-2 today. Switzerland was a 5-1 game. Oddly, yeah. So let's see. Czechia, Switzerland, and then France. So McDavid right now is tied for the tournament lead with 6 points alongside Slovakia's Slafkovsky, which is a bit of a surprise name to be tied with McDavid. He's been electric. He has been exactly what you would expect from Connor McDavid. This roster is very similar to the Four Nations one that won that tournament. It would appear that Canada's roster is firing on all cylinders. Their number one power play unit is just devastating. You had Sid, McDavid, and McKinnon as your forwards on the first power play unit. Find me a better three in the entire world. I just can't name it. I just can't. Even the US can't do it. Sweden? Nope. But you have Sid, Nathan McKinnon, Sam Reinhart, Mitch Marner. They're all contributing. Then you got the Phenom, Macklin Celebrini. He's like a year removed from the World Juniors. He had a goal against and an assist against Switzerland. And just watching this kid play and watching him with the San Jose Sharks the last 2 years, he's just a real special kid. Canada's defense has been really good locking other teams down. Cale Makar, Drew Doughty. They're playing huge minutes. Jordan Binnington looks solid. He doesn't look out of place. He hasn't given them reason to yank him yet. I mean, he struggled in the NHL this year. But in this type of a tournament, he just seems to thrive. And I get where Sid Seixeiro's coming from. That he's like, yo, we got to stop bagging on this guy for how bad he's been this year, even though it hasn't been great when he's with St. Louis. But this is a Stanley Cup winner. This is a Four Nations Cup winner. This is a guy who, when it matters the most, shows up. If he wins a gold medal here, that will put him in some very elite Canadian goaltending, if not world goaltending company. Canada is the heavy favorite to win gold. They've looked very unstoppable. Team USA is battling for Group C. They're also undefeated at this moment. 5-1 over Latvia, that was pretty comfortable, but that Denmark game, they were down 2-1 at one point. It ended up as a 6-3 victory, but it was wild. The USA gave up the first goal in just 1:40 seconds. Denmark then led 2-1, the US led 2-1, fell behind 3-2, and they had to battle back. Matt Boldy scored his first goal of the tournament. Jack Eichel had 2 assists. But the Americans didn't look real good, and one of the biggest questions coming into the tournament, if you go back and check out True North Sports Talk, was what kind of goaltending are they going to get? Connor Hellebuyck has been okay, but not his usual dominant self. He gave up the 3 goals to Denmark, which shouldn't happen, but how much of that was the guys in front of him? The USA plays Germany today, probably ongoing right now, for their final preliminary game. If they can win that game, then they win their group. Sweden is 2-1. They've clinched Group B. I believe their only loss was Finland. They beat Slovakia. And they look really dangerous. You have Victor Hedman saying whether we go straight through to the quarters or not, it doesn't really matter. We've got to win out here. So now the fun starts. Finland 2-1 is advancing. And they're the defending Olympic champions from Beijing. And they are always dangerous. Just ask the Swedes. Slovakia is 1-2, but they're advancing. They have a tiebreaker, and they upset Finland 4-1 in the opening game, which was a bit of a shocker. That was huge for them, and then they lost to the Swedes 5-3. So they still advance. Again, the quarters start on Tuesday. The bracket will be determined after the games are done today. And you can expect matchups like Canada, Latvia, US, Czechia, Sweden, Germany, Finland, Slovakia, stuff like that. But we'll see what they are for sure once the games are over today. Canada and the US are on a collision course, hopefully in the gold medal game. As always, that takes place on February 22nd, which is the last day of the games itself. And it will be must-watch TV. Alright, so our last segment here concerning the Olympics is, holy smokes, look at the controversy happening in curling. Who knew that curling could have controversy? This has got to be one of the most explosive stories out of the Olympics. And both Canadian curling teams, the women and the men, have been accused of cheating in the past 48 hours. And it's gotten a little bit ugly. So what happened? Well, the men's team the other day faced Sweden in the preliminary round match. Canada won 8-6, but during the game, Sweden's Oscar Eriksson accused Canada's third, Marc Kennedy, of double touching the curling stone. So here's what the rule is. When you release the stone, you can only touch the handle. If your fingers touch the granite, so the gray part, after release, it's a violation and the stone is removed from play. Now, Eriksson claimed Kennedy double touched. Kennedy exploded, saying, "Who's doing it? I haven't done it once. You can bleep off." That expletive-laden outburst was caught on the broadcast and kind of went a bit viral. Curling Canada issued Kennedy a verbal warning for his language, because again, this is a pretty benign sport we're talking about here. And then video surfaced, apparently filmed by Swedish public broadcaster SVT, that appeared to show Kennedy's finger grazing the granite. The video went viral on social media. Kennedy maintained his innocence, saying, "If somebody said to you, 'Hey, you double touch all the time,' I honestly, in that split second of a moment, I couldn't even tell you if I do or not." He then accused Sweden of premeditated planning, trying to catch them in something untoward. World Curling has issued a statement saying they observed Kennedy for 3 ends and they did not find any violations. So then what happened yesterday? Well, Rachel Homan was facing Switzerland. No one on Switzerland complained. A match official stopped play mid-match and accused Rachel Homan on her first rock of the match in end number 1 of double touching. That official removed the stone from play. Homan looked shocked. She denied the allegations. Video appeared to show her finger touching the granite, but the only angle I've been able to find would be categorically inconclusive. So right from the get-go, I've said, I need a different angle on this. And I haven't dug real deep, so there might be another angle out there. Canada ended up losing to Switzerland 8-7 in an extra end, and there goes that rock that would have got them an extra point. So they probably don't even go to the extra end because they win. Homan said afterward, I don't understand the call. I'll never understand it. We've never done that. It has nothing to do with us. She believes she was unfairly targeted because of the controversy on the men's side. To me, that's a fair assessment. They are looking for reasons to get after Team Canada now. Doesn't matter which side, men or women of the curling, they're looking to get after them after Sweden did what they did. So what was World Curling's response? They issued a clarification. During forward motion, touching the granite of the stone is not allowed. This will result in the stone being removed from play. Well, they already made that clear from the men's thing and from reading the rule itself. They also announced that starting Saturday afternoon, 2 officials would move between all 4 sheets and observe deliveries more closely. Why is this a big deal? Well, curling is known, similar to golf, as a gentleman's sport. It's built on honor, integrity, sportsmanship. Cheating allegations are rare, which is why this is so shocking. But they are also need to be treated very seriously. Canada is the top, or one of the top, curling nations in the world. We simply excel at the sport. Randy Ferbey, Colleen Jones, Jennifer Jones, Kevin Martin. Those are just some of the... Jacobs, the guy who's there this year. Rachel Homan. Like, you could go on and on. Not Colleen Jones. Sandra Schmirler? If I'm getting that name right. Like, we could go back however far you want to go back. We have had one of the best curling programs in the history of curling. So the Swedish and Canadian teams, they used to be close friends off the ice. Clearly, that's not the case now. There's some animosity there. Kennedy apologized for his language, but not his actions. What did he do wrong defending himself, really? He said, I probably could have handled myself better in the moment. I know I'm a role model for Canadian curlers, which he is for sure. So if I apologize at all, it's to the young curlers around the country that would have expected more from me. Curling Canada CEO Nolan Tyson defended his team, saying, we're fully supportive of Team Jacobs. I stand behind those guys. They always play with a lot of integrity, and they would never knowingly do anything that was offside from the rules. Having watched Rachel Homan from the time she was like 16, I would say the same of her. So where do things stand right now? Well, the men's team is 2-1 after losing to Switzerland 9-5 on Saturday. Kennedy had the worst shot success of all 4 Canadian players in that game. You can imagine he was trying to overcompensate. Canada's women's team is now 1-3 and in danger of missing the medal round altogether. That's odd for a team this good. Both teams are under the microscope. Every throw they make, every stone down the ice is being, like, the pressure is intense. If Canada and Sweden both make the semifinals and they have a rematch, that will be must-watch TV in its own right. Because this is the biggest curling controversy. To say in years would be an understatement. I don't think I've ever seen one like this before. Ever. Ever. And until these Olympic Games are over, and maybe even into future, it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere anytime soon. All right. Just over an hour. We did okay. But that's it for today's massive episode. There was so much to cover, so much to talk about. We covered the Blue Jays injuries going on with Santander, Francis, and Bieber. We talked about the Joey Loperfido trade, which was shocking to say the least. Berríos' emotional apology. We talked about some of the new faces we could be seeing, although I think the Blue Jays out of every team have invited the most players. Then we jumped into the Olympics. Canada's rolling in hockey. Both curling teams are in the boiling pot, to say the least. And the quarterfinals start on Tuesday. Curling continues. Spring training rolls on in Dunedin. So, what do you guys think? Hashtag True North Sports Talk Podcast. Jump into the comments. Can the Blue Jays overcome these injuries? Will Canada win the Olympic gold medal in hockey? Even John Schneider seems to think so. What do you make of all this curling brouhaha? So hit me up in the comments. Let us know. Appreciate y'all sticking it out to the end of True North Sports Talk. Until next time, stay passionate, stay informed, and see you down the road.